What if I told you that the secret to unshakable calm and mental toughness has been around for over 2,000 years, yet most of us scroll right past it every single day? Think about it. You get cut off in traffic, your boss dumps an impossible deadline on your desk, or someone you love lets you down. The knee-jerk reaction? Anger, stress, disappointment. But the Stoics, those ancient thinkers from Greece and Rome, had a different response. They believed life's blows weren't obstacles, but training grounds. And if you learn how to approach them correctly, nothing, not betrayal, not failure, not even death, can shake your inner peace. That's not just philosophy. That's a survival skill in our chaotic, modern world. I've spent decades studying Stoicism, and I can tell you it isn't about memorizing quotes or pretending you're a stone wall with no feelings. It's about practical, everyday tools. Tools that can make you stronger at work, calmer at home, and more resilient when life hits you where it hurts. Today, we're going to dive into 11 timeless lessons from Stoicism. And by the end of this video, you'll see how these ancient ideas can help you navigate the messy, unpredictable, pressure-filled life you're living right now. Lesson 1. Control what's in your power. Epictetus, once a slave who became one of Stoicism's greatest teachers, hammered this into his students. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. That's it. That's the dividing line between suffering and peace. It sounds almost too simple, but let me show you why it's life-changing. Think about your own life. Maybe you're worried about whether your company is going to lay people off. You can't control that. Or you're checking social media and see someone's perfect life vacation pictures, and suddenly you feel small. You can't control what they post. Or maybe you're obsessing about whether your kid will get into the right college. You can't fully control that either. What you can control is how you show up, your effort, your attitude, your choices in the moment. The Stoics would say, don't fight the tide. Instead, focus on steering the ship. A sailor can't command the winds, but he can raise or lower the sails. That distinction is everything. Let me give you a modern example. I once coached a young man in corporate America who was stressed out of his mind. His company was going through a merger, and rumors were flying about layoffs. He lost sleep every night imagining worst-case scenarios. I asked him, "Can you control whether the board fires you?" He shook his head. "Then what can you control?" After a long silence, he finally said, "I guess my work today, my performance, my job search if it comes to that." Exactly. Once he shifted from obsessing about rumors to updating his resume, building relationships, and focusing on daily performance, the anxiety didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling him. He slept better. He performed better. That's Stoicism in action. And here's where I'll add my own perspective. As an American living through 9/11, the 2008 crash, and the COVID-19 pandemic, I've seen how quickly the ground under our feet can shift. Jobs vanish, health crumbles, economies collapse. The people who survive, and not just survive, but adapt and thrive, are the ones who stop wasting energy on what's outside their hands. They double down on the controllable, their skills, their health, their connections, their mindset. You might ask, but doesn't that mean just accepting defeat? Not at all. Stoicism isn't passive. It's the opposite. It's about taking fierce, relentless action in the areas you actually can influence. Worry is wasted effort. Action is fuel. And when you channel energy into your sphere of control, you become unstoppable. Not because you always win, but because you're no longer enslaved by outcomes. So here's a challenge for you. Tonight, grab a sheet of paper. Draw 2 columns. On the left, write what I can control. On the right, what I cannot control. Then be ruthless. Move 90% of your mental clutter to the cannot column. Stock market swings, out of your control. Other people's opinions, out of your control. Your effort at the gym, your words in the next meeting, your kindness to a stranger, that's your arena. And once you see it laid out like that, the choice becomes obvious. That's how you reclaim your power. Lesson 2. Prepare, do your best, then release outcomes. One of the biggest sources of stress in modern life isn't just the workload we carry, it's the weight of expectations. We prepare for a job interview, we study for an exam, we craft a presentation for the boardroom, and then we torture ourselves over whether it will be good enough. The irony is that the very pressure we put on ourselves often sabotages our performance. The Stoics, thousands of years ago, had a clearer way. They believed, do everything within your control to prepare, execute with full effort, and then let the result go. Epictetus would say, make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. That's liberating, because it reminds us that outcomes live in the realm of fortune, not mastery. You can train like an athlete, but you can't control whether your opponent trips or whether the referee makes a bad call. You can study all night for an exam, but you can't control whether the professor tosses in a curveball question. You can put together a flawless business pitch, but you can't control whether the investor's kid got sick that morning and soured his mood. The point is, if you've done your job, you've already succeeded. Everything else is bonus. Let me tell you a story. A good friend of mine, Sarah, is a trial lawyer. Early in her career, she would obsess before every case. She'd rehearse opening statements until 2 in the morning, replay every possible cross-examination in her head, and then still spend hours panicking about how the jury might see her. One day, her mentor pulled her aside and said, "Sarah, you can't control 12 strangers' minds. You can only control your preparation and your delivery. If you've done both well, the verdict is out of your hands." That changed everything. She still prepares obsessively, but once she steps into court, she releases the result. And paradoxically, she's become calmer, more persuasive, and more successful because she no longer carries the crushing weight of trying to control the uncontrollable. This lesson applies everywhere. Athletes talk about trusting the process. Musicians talk about letting the performance breathe. Even in relationships, you can't force someone to love you back. You can only show up honestly, kindly, and fully. What they do with that is beyond your jurisdiction. Here's a very American example. Job interviews. We've all been there. Walking into that room, sweaty palms, heart racing, trying to guess what the recruiter wants to hear. The Stoic approach? Prepare thoroughly. Research the company, practice answers, get a good night's sleep, then walk in, speak with clarity and authenticity, and when it's done, don't replay every answer in your head for the next 3 weeks. The outcome isn't yours anymore. If you get the job, great. If not, you still won because you've grown sharper, braver, and better prepared for the next one. And let me get personal here. During the financial crash of 2008, I lost nearly half of my savings. I remember staring at my account balance, feeling sick. I had done everything right. I diversified, I invested steadily, but the market collapsed anyway. I could have blamed myself endlessly, but that wouldn't have fixed a thing. What I could do was learn from it, tighten my strategy, and focus on how I responded. That's what Stoicism teaches us. Your preparation and your response are yours, but the outcome floats in the winds of fate. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, lived this out every day. Imagine ruling an empire while battling constant wars, plagues, and betrayals. Did he control every outcome? Of course not. But he wrote in his Meditations, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason, which today arm you against the present." That's the Stoic spirit. Arm yourself with preparation, then walk calmly into whatever comes. Now, let's pull this lesson into something practical for you. Next time you're facing a high-stakes situation, use this 3-step Stoic ritual. Prepare relentlessly. Do everything within your control. Study, rehearse, organize, practice. Leave no stone unturned. Perform fully. When the moment comes, throw your whole self into it. Don't hold back. Release completely. Once it's over, let it go. Obsessing won't change the past. Worrying won't control the result. I'll add this. Releasing doesn't mean not caring. It means caring about the right thing. Care about your growth, not the scoreboard. Care about how you showed up, not whether luck tilted the scales. That subtle shift is what frees you. Think of a baseball player at bat. He can control his stance, his swing, his timing. He cannot control whether the pitcher throws a nasty curveball or whether the wind carries the ball foul. If he's obsessed with the scoreboard, he'll tense up. But if he focuses only on his swing, his form, his presence in that moment, he plays with freedom. And freedom, ironically, leads to better performance. So the next time you feel crushed under pressure, whether it's giving a speech, asking someone out, or making a career leap, remember the Stoic mantra. Prepare, do your best, then release. That's not just philosophy. That's mental health. That's the difference between living in constant anxiety and walking with calm confidence through the storm. Lesson 3. Guard your focus like treasure. If there's one currency more valuable than money in today's world, it's attention. Money lost can often be earned back, but once your focus is gone, once your energy is scattered into 1,000 little fragments, you can't get that hour back. You can't buy it again. Seneca warned us nearly 2,000 years ago, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And if Seneca thought people were wasting time back in the Roman Empire, imagine what he'd say about us, scrolling TikTok for 40 minutes while promising ourselves just one more video. The Stoics knew that clarity of mind and purpose came from guarding one's focus. They believed that the ability to direct your attention toward what truly matters is one of life's highest virtues. And if you think about it, this is the foundation of everything else: career, relationships, self-mastery. Without focus, effort is diluted. With focus, even modest effort becomes powerful. Let me illustrate this with a very American story. A few years ago, I mentored a young professional named Jason. He had a good job in tech, but he constantly felt overwhelmed. His desk was a battlefield of sticky notes. His phone buzzed every 5 minutes. He had 32 browser tabs open at all times, and he'd tell me, "I just can't seem to get anything meaningful done." So I asked him to try something radically stoic. Single tasking. Pick one project. Shut every other tab. Put the phone in another room. Give that one task your complete attention for 90 minutes. At first, he hated it. He felt anxious without the constant stimulation. But within a week, he finished a project that had been haunting him for 3 months. The clarity, the confidence. It was like he unlocked a new version of himself. That's what happens when you guard your focus. The Stoics might not have had email or Instagram notifications, but they knew distraction. Rome was filled with noisy markets, political chaos, and endless spectacles. Marcus Aurelius himself wrote in his Meditations, "You must build yourself up each day with fortitude, like a soldier preparing for battle. Distractions will come, but do not be pulled like a puppet on strings." He was an emperor with wars on the borders and betrayals in the palace, yet he insisted on carving time to reflect, write, and direct his mind inward. Think about your own life. How often do you begin your day with an intention? Maybe to finish that report, call that client, or just sit down to write. And suddenly 3 hours vanish in email, group chats, or mindless scrolling. That's the silent thief of modern life. It's not always dramatic disasters that derail us. It's the constant drip of distraction. Here's the Stoic truth. You cannot control the flood of inputs, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to guard your focus as if it were sacred. Now, let's bring this down to earth with a few practical strategies that align with Stoic wisdom. Start your day with a clear intention. Before the world floods in, decide, what is one thing today that, if done, would make it a successful day? Write it down. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings reminding himself of the challenges ahead. You can do the same. Prepare your mind before chaos arrives. Use obstacles as cues. Seneca wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." If you find yourself distracted, don't beat yourself up. Instead, use the distraction as a reminder to return. Every time you notice your mind wandering, treat it as training, like lifting a weight. Each return builds focus muscles. Build boundaries. Epictetus told his students not to hand over their minds to gossip, chatter, or trivial pursuits. Today, that means putting your phone on airplane mode while working, saying no to unnecessary meetings, or even just closing the door for an hour. Your environment shapes your attention. Guard it. Practice presence. The Stoics weren't monks hiding in caves. They lived in the middle of chaos. But they trained themselves to be fully present in each task. Whether eating, writing, or speaking, they aim to do it completely. Try this. The next time you wash dishes, only wash dishes. No podcasts, no phone calls. That simple act of presence is a Stoic workout for focus. Let me share another story. During the pandemic, a CEO I know confessed to me, "I've been in back-to-back Zoom calls for weeks, but I can't remember a single important decision I made." He was exhausted, not from overwork, but from fractured attention. So I suggested a Stoic-inspired ritual. Between meetings, take 2 minutes to breathe, close your eyes, and ask, "What matters in the next hour?" He did it, and within a month, his team noticed a difference. He was sharper, calmer, more decisive. He wasn't doing less work. He was focusing on the right work. That's the Stoic secret. It's not about doing everything. It's about doing the essential things well. And here's the personal reflection I want to leave you with. I grew up in a culture that glorified multitasking. The busier you looked, the more important you seemed. But over time, I realized busyness is cheap, focus is rare. And the people I've admired most, mentors, leaders, even wise old friends, weren't the busiest. They were the most focused. When they listened, they truly listened. When they worked, they were absorbed. And when they rested, they really rested. That presence is magnetic. So here's your challenge. Tomorrow, pick one moment to guard fiercely. Maybe it's writing that email with total attention. Maybe it's dinner with your kids without a phone in sight. Maybe it's 15 minutes of journaling. Whatever it is, treat your focus as sacred, because in the end, your life is nothing more than the sum of where your attention has gone. The Stoics remind us, don't squander it. Don't trade it for cheap distractions. Guard your focus like treasure, because it is. Lesson 4. Mastering time. Life is long, if you use it well. Seneca, the great Stoic thinker, once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough if you know how to use it." When I first read that as a young man in my 20s, it didn't hit me as hard as it does now in my 50s. Back then, time felt endless, like an ocean that would never dry up. Today, I feel the tide moving faster, and Seneca's warning lands with a sharp truth. Our problem isn't the length of life, it's how we spend it. Think about your average day. How much of it is consumed by things that don't matter? Endless scrolling, complaining, sitting in meetings that should have been emails, worrying about someone else's opinion. By the end of the day, we're exhausted, yet nothing meaningful was accomplished. That's not living, that's drifting. And the Stoics hated drifting. The Romans used the phrase, memento mori, remember you must die. Not to be morbid, but to wake themselves up, to remind themselves that each hour spent is gone forever. They wanted us to feel the weight of time, not to scare us, but to jolt us into urgency. Here's an American example. A friend of mine named Mike worked in finance for over 20 years. He made good money, but he spent most of his days in 12-hour shifts, grinding through spreadsheets, then collapsing in front of the TV. He used to say, "When I retire at 65, I'll finally live." But one day, his doctor told him he had heart problems. Suddenly, retirement didn't feel like a guarantee. That wake-up call forced him to reconsider. What am I doing with the time I have? He switched jobs, started spending evenings with his kids, and even picked up painting again, something he loved as a teenager. He told me later, "I realized I wasn't living a life, I was delaying one." That's the tragedy Seneca was warning us against. The Stoics weren't asking us to quit our jobs or abandon responsibilities. They were asking us to stop wasting life and half-living. If you're going to work, work fully. If you're with your family, be present. If you're resting, rest without guilt. That's how time stretches. It's not about quantity. It's about quality. Let's be honest. In America today, we glorify busyness. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. People brag about working 80 hours a week or sleeping only 4 hours a night, as if that proves their worth. But Seneca would shake his head. Busyness isn't the same as productivity. Filling your calendar doesn't mean you're living a meaningful life. So, how do we reclaim time in a Stoic way? Here are 3 practices that I've used myself. Audit your time honestly. For 1 week, write down how you actually spend your hours. Track every meeting, every scroll, every break. It can be painful, but it's eye-opening. You'll see how much of your busyness is really just leakage. Prioritize essentials. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do every act of your life as though it were your last." That doesn't mean live recklessly. It means live intentionally. Choose tasks that matter. Let go of the trivial many. Guard time for reflection. The Stoics journaled, meditated, and carved out time to think. In a distracted world, this is revolutionary. 10 minutes of quiet reflection each morning can shift your entire day. Here's another story. During the pandemic, when everything slowed down, I spoke with a nurse named Linda. She was working brutal shifts in the ICU, and yet she said something that stunned me. For the first time, I realized what matters. I don't waste time on gossip. I don't binge shows for hours. I spend my free time calling my parents, reading good books, and just sitting quietly on the porch. That's Stoicism in action. Crisis stripped away the non-essentials, and she found clarity. The question is, why wait for a crisis? Seneca's words can guide us daily. Life is long enough if you stop throwing it away. Imagine how different your life would look if you cut out even 1 hour a day of wasted time. Over a year, that's 365 hours. Over a decade, that's nearly 4,000 hours, more than 160 full days. That's time you could spend building a skill, strengthening a relationship, or simply being alive in the present moment. I'll share something personal. Years ago, I used to lose whole evenings to mindless TV. I'd tell myself, I deserve this after a hard day. But afterward, I always felt emptier, not fuller. Then I decided to replace just half of that time with journaling and reading Stoic philosophy. The difference was dramatic. My mind sharpened. My evenings felt fuller. I still watched shows, but intentionally, not as a default. That's the difference between wasting time and choosing how to spend it. And here's the paradox. When you stop wasting time, life doesn't feel shorter. It feels longer because you're awake for it. You're present. You're living each hour, not numbing yourself through it. So here's my challenge for you. Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, where did my time go today? Not in a self-critical way, but with curiosity. Did it go to things that mattered? Or did it slip away into the cracks of distraction? If it slipped, don't despair. The Stoics remind us you always get another chance tomorrow. But don't delay forever, because eventually, time runs out. The Stoic path is clear. Master your time, or time will master you. And when you master it, life stops feeling short. It starts feeling wide, deep, and full. Lesson 5. Do the hard thing first. Eating the frog. There's a phrase in modern productivity circles. Eat the frog. It means tackle the hardest, most important task of the day first thing in the morning. The name comes from Mark Twain, who supposedly said, "If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, eat the biggest one first." Twain wasn't a Stoic, but he might as well have been. because the Stoics taught the same principle centuries earlier. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the thing you dread, the obstacle in your path, that's exactly what you need to face. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Let me ask you, what's the frog in your life? Maybe it's an uncomfortable phone call you've been avoiding. Maybe it's that mountain of paperwork. Maybe it's a tough conversation with your partner. Whatever it is, it sits in the back of your mind, draining your energy all day. The Stoic solution is simple. Stop carrying the weight. Face it first, free yourself, and let the rest of the day flow. I remember working with a client named Rebecca, a manager at a marketing firm. She was brilliant at her job, but constantly anxious. Why? She always left her hardest task, the performance reviews for her team, until late Friday. Every week, the dread built up. By Friday afternoon, she was exhausted, stressed, and short-tempered. We made one simple change. Schedule those reviews for 9 a.m. Monday. It was brutal at first. Nobody likes eating the frog at the start of the week. But within a month, she told me, "I feel like I've gained back my whole week." Once the hardest thing is done, everything else feels lighter. That's Stoic wisdom in practice. And here's the truth. Procrastination is a thief, not just of time, but of peace of mind. When you delay the hard thing, you don't escape it, you just extend the suffering. The Stoics would say you're fighting reality. Epictetus reminded his students that the only real pain comes from our resistance. The task itself is usually manageable. It's our mental buildup that makes it unbearable. Think about athletes. A boxer doesn't walk into the ring hoping to fight the weakest opponent. He trains against the hardest challenges, so he'll be ready for anything. In the same way, life's frogs are training grounds. The tough email, the scary presentation, the hard workout, these are weights that build your Stoic muscle. Here's a personal story. Years ago, I was drowning in credit card debt. Every time I thought about it, my stomach knotted. I avoided opening bills. I told myself I'd deal with it next month. But the dread never left. It followed me everywhere. Finally, I decided to face it the Stoic way. One Saturday morning, I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled out every bill. I listed every debt, every interest rate, every due date. It was ugly. But you know what? As soon as I had it all on paper, I felt lighter. The monster shrank. That moment of facing it directly, of eating the frog, was the beginning of getting free. Within 3 years, I was debt-free, not because I found some magic trick, but because I stopped running. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." When you put the hard thing first, you take away its power. Now, let's talk practical strategies. Identify your frog daily. Each morning, ask, what's the one thing I'm most likely to avoid, but that would make the biggest difference if I did it? That's your frog. Do it first, before distractions. Don't let the day steal your best energy. The morning hours are sacred. Tackle the tough task before checking emails, social media, or even small errands. Shrink it down. Sometimes the frog feels too big. Break it into smaller bites. Don't write a book, write a paragraph. Don't fix your finances. List one bill. The act of starting is 80% of the battle. Reward yourself. The Stoics weren't joyless. Celebrate the freedom you feel after facing the hard thing. Notice how the rest of the day flows easier. That's the reward. Let's bring in another American example. Navy SEALs. They have a saying, embrace the suck. When training gets brutal, they lean into it, not away. Why? Because they know the obstacle is the path. That mindset is pure Stoicism. If you make a habit of facing the hardest thing every morning, you don't just get more done, you become stronger, calmer, more resilient. And here's the reflection I want to leave you with. Life will always hand you frogs. Some will be small annoyances, others massive challenges. You don't get to choose whether they show up, but you do get to choose how you face them. If you spend your life avoiding the hard things, you live in chains. If you face them first, you live free. So tomorrow morning, don't reach for your phone. Don't waste your sharpest energy on trivia. Look your frog in the eye and eat it. The Stoics would smile and say, that's the way forward. Lesson 6. One thing at a time. The power of simplicity. In our modern world, we often confuse multitasking with productivity. We think that if we can juggle 5 tasks at once, we're somehow winning at life. We're on Zoom while checking Slack, eating lunch while scrolling Instagram, half listening to our kids while sending a work email. But deep down, we know the truth. Multitasking doesn't make us more effective. It makes us more scattered, more anxious, and ultimately less fulfilled. The Stoics, long before smartphones or 24/7 work culture, understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you seek tranquility, do less." Or, more accurately, do what's essential, which brings a double satisfaction. Doing less, but better. That's the essence of simplicity. Focus on one thing at a time, and do it well. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're at dinner with your spouse, but you're also answering work emails under the table. Are you really present at the meal? No. Are you really effective at your emails? Not really. You've divided yourself in half, and both halves are weaker. The Stoic way would be to set the phone down, give your full presence to the meal, and later, when you sit down at your desk, give your full presence to the work. One thing at a time. Simplicity. I once worked with an entrepreneur named Daniel, who bragged about being a master multitasker. He ran 3 startups at once, answered emails during meetings, and prided himself on never wasting a minute. But his health collapsed, his relationships suffered, and worse, none of his companies thrived. They all limped along. Finally, he hit a wall and had to admit, splitting himself in 5 directions meant nothing got his best. After reading Marcus Aurelius, he changed his approach. Cut down to one company, dedicate full attention, and simplify his daily schedule. Within a year, that one business was more successful than the 3 combined. Simplicity wasn't weakness, it was power. The Stoics believed repetition and single-mindedness sharpened the soul. Epictetus told his students to do what is before you clearly and fully. That means if you're sweeping the floor, sweep the floor. If you're writing a letter, write the letter. It's not glamorous, but it builds clarity, discipline, and a kind of inner peace. Let's be honest. Our brains aren't built for multitasking. Neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Every time you switch tasks, your brain pays a toll. It takes energy to shift gears, and those tiny tolls add up to exhaustion. That's why you can spend a whole day busy, yet feel like you accomplished nothing. The Stoics would call that wasted life. So how do we live this lesson today? Here are some Stoic-inspired practices. Set clear priorities. Each morning decide, what are the 2 or 3 most important things today? Forget the rest. Seneca said, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. Don't scatter yourself. Give full attention to the task at hand. If you're working, close the other tabs. If you're with a friend, put the phone away. Treat each task, no matter how small, as if it were sacred. Embrace repetition. The Stoics believe virtue came from daily practice. Brushing your teeth? Do it mindfully. Writing emails? Do them with care. Even small tasks done with full presence refine your character. Pause between tasks. Marcus Aurelius journaled each day to create space between duties. We can do the same. Take a breath before moving from one thing to the next. Reset. Here's another story. During the pandemic, my neighbor, a teacher, found herself juggling remote classes, homeschooling her own kids, and caring for her aging parents. She felt like she was failing at everything. I suggested a Stoic exercise. Break the day into blocks. During class time, teach fully. During family meals, be fully present. During caregiving hours, give full attention. And then stop trying to blur them all together. Within weeks, she told me she felt lighter. Nothing had changed in her responsibilities, but everything had changed in her approach. Simplicity brought clarity. I'll admit, this is a lesson I've had to relearn over and over. In my early career, I prided myself on answering emails at midnight, taking conference calls during vacations, and working on multiple projects simultaneously. I thought that made me impressive, but it really just made me tired and mediocre. When I finally shifted to focusing on one major project at a time, I produced better work, had more energy, and, ironically, got more done. Simplicity wasn't about doing less. It was about doing better. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, approach each task as though it were your last. That doesn't mean being grim, it means being present. If this were the last time you tucked your child into bed, wouldn't you want to give them your full attention? If this were the last email you ever sent, wouldn't you want it to be clear and thoughtful? That urgency transforms the ordinary into the meaningful. And here's the reflection I'll leave you with. Life is complicated enough. Don't make it more so by scattering your energy. Choose simplicity. Choose focus. Do one thing at a time. Do it well. And in that clarity, you'll find not just productivity, but peace. Because at the end of the day, your life won't be measured by how many tasks you juggled, but by how deeply you lived the ones that mattered. Lesson 7. Master yourself before the world. If you ask most people what it means to be powerful, they'll point to money, political influence, or social status. But the Stoics saw power differently. They believed the only true mastery was mastery of the self. Epictetus, who was born a slave, put it plainly, no man is free who is not master of himself. Think about that for a second. A person might run a Fortune 500 company, command thousands of employees, and still be enslaved. Enslaved to anger, greed, fear, or addiction. On the flip side, A janitor earning minimum wage could walk with real freedom if he has control over his emotions, habits, and choices.
The Stoics saw self-mastery as the foundation of a good life. Why? Because life is unpredictable. You can't control markets, weather, or even other people's actions. But you can control how you respond. And that one lever, your response, determines whether you live in peace or torment. I'll give you an American example. A buddy of mine, James, served 2 tours in Iraq. When he came home, he struggled with anger. Little things set him off: traffic, bureaucracy, even a slow barista. But through therapy and Stoic practice, he learned a powerful truth. He couldn't control what happened on the battlefield, but he could control how he carried those memories. He told me once, "When I realized I could choose not to explode, not to let my emotions run me, I felt freer than I ever did with a rifle in my hands." That's self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius lived this lesson daily. As emperor, he faced betrayals, plagues, and endless wars. Yet his meditations read less like the diary of a ruler and more like the journal of a man trying to keep his own soul steady. He reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Let's be real. Controlling ourselves is often harder than controlling others. It's easy to shout at your kid than to pause and respond calmly. It's easier to binge Netflix than to open that book. It's easier to lash out on Twitter than to hold your tongue. But the Stoics saw these easy choices as traps. Every time you give in to impulse, you weaken yourself. Every time you master an impulse, you strengthen yourself. So, how do we practice this today? The Stoics gave us tools, and modern psychology backs them up. Pause before reacting. Epictetus told his students, when someone provokes you, remember, it is your judgment that angers you, not their words. Try this. Next time someone cuts you off in traffic, notice the spark of anger rising. Instead of feeding it, take one deep breath. That pause is your power. Build daily disciplines. Self-mastery doesn't happen in emergencies. It happens in small routines. Journaling, exercise, meditation, eating with moderation. These daily practices train you to steer yourself when storms hit. Reframe adversity. The Stoics saw every difficulty as training. Lost your job? Training in resilience. Got insulted? Training in humility. Faced with temptation? Training in discipline. If you see life as a gym for the soul, every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice mastery. Here's another story. I once coached a young man named Luis who struggled with drinking. He wanted to quit, but every weekend peer pressure pulled him back. We reframed it stoically. Every invitation is not a trap. It's training. Each no strengthens your muscle of self-control. Slowly, he built that muscle. Today, he's been sober 5 years, he told me. Every time I say no, I feel more like myself, not less. The Stoics knew self-mastery wasn't about suppressing feelings. It was about guiding them. Anger isn't evil, it's energy misdirected. Desire isn't evil, it's a signal to be disciplined. Fear isn't evil, it's an invitation to courage. Mastery doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you don't let feelings hijack the steering wheel. Here's a personal confession. I used to be quick-tempered. A rude email, a careless comment, and I'd stew for days. It drained me. The breakthrough came when I adopted Marcus Aurelius' mantra. If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. Most things in life are endurable. Once I stopped feeding irritation, it stopped owning me. Think about athletes again. Michael Jordan didn't just master basketball skills, He mastered his mind. He used insults and failures as fuel. He controlled his habits relentlessly, his training, his diet, his rest. That's why he dominated. In the same way, self-mastery in life is about controlling your inner game so you can face the outer game. So here's your challenge. This week, pick one impulse to master. Maybe it's the urge to check your phone every 5 minutes. Maybe it's the urge to eat that extra cookie. Maybe it's the urge to snap at your coworker. Every time you resist, you build muscle. And like weightlifting, the reps add up. The Stoics remind us, the world will always be wild. People will be unfair. Disasters will come. Change will blindside you. But if you master yourself, none of it can enslave you. That's real power. Not the power to bend others to your will, but the power to remain steady when the world shakes. So master yourself, because until you do, nothing else you master will matter. Lesson 8. Keep ego in check. Humility and resilience. If there's one enemy the Stoics warned about as much as anger or fear, it was ego. Not healthy confidence, ego. The voice inside that says, I deserve more than this. The part of us that ties our worth to recognition, titles, or applause. The Stoics saw ego as dangerous because it makes us fragile. If your value comes from outside approval, then every criticism becomes a wound. Every missed promotion becomes a humiliation. Every time someone overlooks you, it feels like an attack. Epictetus taught, when you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger. That's humility in practice, looking inward before pointing outward. In America today, we see ego everywhere. Social media feeds it. Everyone curates their highlight reel, measuring worth in likes and followers. At work, ego whispers, if you don't get that title, you're nobody. In relationships, ego insists, if they don't treat you the way you want, you've been disrespected. And when ego drives the wheel, we end up constantly disappointed, bitter, or insecure. The Stoics offered an antidote. Detach your worth from recognition. Tie it to your actions, not the outcome. Do the work because it is right, not because someone is watching. Let me give you a story. Years ago, I worked with a software engineer named Alex. Brilliant guy, but deeply frustrated. He felt overlooked for promotions. I do all this work and nobody notices, he complained. His resentment grew and his performance slipped. One day I asked him, if no one ever praised you again, would the work still matter? He was stunned, silent. Slowly he realized his ego, not his effort, was driving his unhappiness. We reframed it. Do your job as service. Do it with excellence, even if no one claps. Within a year, his stress dropped. Ironically, he did get promoted later, but by then, he didn't crave it. He was already free. Marcus Aurelius warned himself daily not to be seduced by fame. He was emperor of Rome, yet he wrote, do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others when you do not refer your thoughts to some object of common utility. You will be deprived of living your life if you are always thinking what others are saying. Imagine that, ruler of the known world, and he still fought against ego. Now, let's bring this closer to home. Maybe you've had this experience. You pour your heart into a project, only for your boss to nitpick or barely notice. The ego screams, "Unfair! Don't they know how hard I worked?" The Stoic response? Quiet the ego. Remind yourself, I did my duty. The rest isn't mine. Your worth isn't diminished by someone else's blindness. This is especially hard in American hustle culture where we're told, prove yourself, get noticed, build your brand. I'm not saying recognition is bad, but when recognition becomes the fuel for your self-worth, you've put your soul in someone else's hands. The Stoics would call that slavery. Here are some Stoic practices to tame the ego. Practice anonymous excellence. Do something excellent without telling anyone. Write a thorough report. Help a coworker quietly. Let the action itself be enough. Rehearse humility. Seneca reminded himself often that he was mortal, fragile, and no better than others. Try this. When pride swells, remember your own flaws. Remember that time you failed. Ego shrinks when honesty grows. Detach effort from applause. Ask yourself, if no one knew I did this, would it still be worth doing? If the answer is yes, that's Stoic virtue. I'll share something personal. Early in my career, I lived for praise. If a boss said, "Great job," I floated for a week. If they criticized me, I sank for a month. It was exhausting. Stoicism helped me shift. I began journaling each night. Did I live with integrity today? Did I act with courage, justice, temperance, wisdom? If the answer was yes, then I counted it as success, whether or not anyone noticed. That shift freed me from chasing approval. Another example. Think of athletes. The great ones aren't motivated only by trophies. Sure, they want to win. But the real mastery is in the daily practice, the quiet reps when nobody's watching. Kobe Bryant wasn't legendary because of his championship rings. He was legendary because of his Mamba mentality, the relentless discipline behind closed doors. That's Stoicism. Mastery without ego. And here's a hard truth. Ego doesn't just make us fragile, it also blinds us. When you're convinced you're better than others, you stop learning. When you tie your value to being right, you resist correction. That's why ego kills growth. The Stoics would say, humility keeps the door open to wisdom. So here's my challenge for you this week. Catch your ego in the act. Notice when you feel slighted because someone didn't notice your work. Notice when you crave credit or applause. Then remind yourself, I work for the sake of the work. The rest doesn't matter. Practice humility in small ways. Thank someone without expecting thanks back. Admit a mistake openly, or do something excellent without posting it online. The Stoics believe the reward of humility is resilience. Because when your worth isn't fragile, you can't be broken by criticism, failure, or being overlooked. You're anchored in your own integrity, not in the shifting winds of other people's opinions. So keep your ego in check, because the world doesn't need more people chasing applause. It needs more people doing good work quietly, steadily, with humility. That's strength. That's resilience. That's Stoicism. Lesson 9. Facing injustice calmly. Stoic courage in the workplace and life. One of the hardest pills to swallow in life is this: the world is not fair. Good people get overlooked. Hard workers get underpaid. Honest voices get silenced, while selfish ones get promoted. If you haven't faced injustice yet, just wait. It's part of the human experience. The Stoics knew this, and they didn't tell us to deny it or pretend it doesn't hurt. Instead, they taught us to face it calmly, courageously, without letting it poison our souls. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, when you wake in the morning, tell yourself, today you will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. Notice what he's doing there. He isn't surprised when people behave badly. He expects it. That way, he isn't blindsided or embittered. He meets injustice as part of the landscape, not as a personal curse. Let me give you a story. A friend of mine, Karen, worked in corporate sales for nearly a decade. She was diligent, respectful, and consistently one of the top performers. But when a big promotion opened up, it went to a coworker who played politics, took credit for others' work, and whispered in the right ears. Karen was crushed. Her first instinct was bitterness. She wanted to quit, slam the door, and tell everyone off. But after weeks of reflection, she decided on a Stoic response. Keep her dignity, keep her performance high, and not let the injustice corrode her character. Eventually, she left that company, not in anger, but with grace, and within a year landed a higher role at a better firm. Her calm endurance turned injustice into a stepping stone. The Stoics would say, you can't control whether people are selfish, dishonest, or unfair, but you can control your reaction. If you let injustice make you bitter, they've won twice. Once in mistreating you, and again in corrupting your spirit. But if you meet injustice with composure, you keep your power. This doesn't mean passivity. The Stoics weren't pushovers. They valued justice deeply. Marcus wrote, "What is not good for the beehive cannot be good for the bee." That means if something harms the community, you have a duty to resist it. But resist it with reason, not rage. Stand up for what's right, but don't let the poison of resentment eat you alive. In America, we love stories of people who turned injustice into fuel. Think about Jackie Robinson, the first black player in Major League Baseball. He faced insults, threats, and unfair treatment daily. But he made a decision. He would not retaliate with violence or hatred. He would let his discipline, his dignity, and his performance speak louder than prejudice. That Stoic strength changed history. Here's another example. A client of mine worked in healthcare and was constantly undermined by a colleague who spread rumors. Instead of retaliating, she documented everything, kept her head clear, and eventually brought the truth forward in a calm, undeniable way. She told me later, if I had exploded, I would have lost credibility. By staying calm, I won both the case and my peace of mind. That's Stoicism, justice through steadiness. So, how do we apply this? Here are some Stoic practices for facing injustice calmly. Expect it. Don't be naive. People will lie, cheat, or mistreat. By expecting it, you remove the element of shock. You're ready, not rattled. Separate what's yours from what's not. You can't control office politics. You can control your work ethic. You can't control gossip. You can control your response. Focus on your lane. Respond with dignity, not rage. Anger clouds judgment. Calmness clarifies. If you need to confront injustice, do it with composure. The calmer you are, the more powerful your voice. See their pain. Often injustice comes from others' wounds, jealousy, insecurity, ignorance. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if they harm me, it's because they don't truly know better. That perspective softens bitterness.
I'll share something personal. Years ago, I was passed over for a leadership role I was promised. It went to someone with less experience, but stronger political ties. For months, I stewed in anger. But then I realized my anger was chaining me to the very system I resented. So I adopted the Stoic approach. Focus on my craft, keep integrity, and quietly prepare for the next move. Within 2 years, I was in a better position at another company. Looking back, that injustice was a gift in disguise. It forced me to grow sharper and tougher.
Seneca once said,
A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. Injustice is friction. It hurts, but it can also polish us if we let it. So here's your challenge. The next time you feel wronged, whether it's by a boss, a colleague, or even a loved one, pause. Instead of exploding, ask, what part of this can I control? How can I respond with dignity? Maybe that means calmly addressing the issue. Maybe it means walking away. Maybe it means using the pain as fuel to grow. But whatever you do, don't let injustice steal your peace, because the world will always have unfairness. The question isn't whether you'll face it, it's how you'll face it. The Stoics remind us, face it calmly, courageously, and with your character intact. That's real victory. Lesson 10. Self-improvement through work. Turning your job into training for virtue. For most of us, work feels like a grind. It's the place we clock in to earn a paycheck, deal with annoying coworkers, and try to survive until Friday. But the Stoics saw work differently. To them, every job, whether emperor or servant, wasn't just about money. It was an arena for self-mastery, a training ground for virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do?" In other words, work isn't punishment, it's practice. Think about it. Where else do you get so many opportunities to test patience, courage, humility, and discipline? At work, you'll face criticism, deadlines, unfairness, and stress. Each of those is a chance to practice being steady, calm, and virtuous. Let me share a story. I once coached a nurse named Amanda. She loved patient care, but hated the bureaucracy of the hospital. She was frustrated with paperwork, endless rules, and ungrateful patients. One day I asked her, what if you saw each frustration not as punishment, but as training? At first she laughed, but slowly she began to shift her mindset. An angry patient became training in compassion. A demanding supervisor became training in patience. Mountains of paperwork became training in discipline. Over time, she told me, the job didn't change, I did. And that made all the difference. That's Stoicism in action. The Stoics remind us, you can't always choose your circumstances, but you can always choose your response. And work, whether glamorous or dull, is where you get to practice that daily. In America, we often dream of escaping our jobs. If only I had a different boss. If only I had a more meaningful role. If only I could quit and move to a cabin in the woods. But the Stoics would challenge us.
If you can't practice virtue here, where you are, what makes you think you'll practice it there? The setting isn't the problem, it's how you show up.
Epictetus told his students, "Difficulties show what men are." Your work difficulties aren't obstacles, they're mirrors. They reveal your character and give you a chance to refine it.
So, how do we transform work into training for virtue? Here are some Stoic approaches.
See every challenge as practice. Criticism? Practice humility. Deadlines? Practice discipline. Office gossip? Practice restraint. Instead of asking, "Why me?" ask, "What virtue can I practice here?"
Detach worth from recognition. Do the work well, not for applause, but for integrity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that even if no one notices, virtue is its own reward.
Bring presence to every task.
Seneca wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Even small tasks, a thank you email, a smile to a coworker, become acts of virtue when done with presence. Reframe boring as discipline. Repetition builds mastery. Instead of resenting routine tasks, use them to train patience and focus. I'll give another story. My friend John worked in a warehouse, lifting boxes day after day. It wasn't glamorous, but he decided to treat it like training. He worked with precision, discipline, and pride, telling himself, "This is my dojo." That mindset not only made him one of the best workers, it gave him a sense of peace others didn't understand. Later, when he moved into management, he carried that same attitude. He didn't see work as punishment. He saw it as practice for life. And I'll be honest, this lesson saved me personally. Early in my career, I hated meetings. I saw them as time wasters. I'd sit there stewing in impatience. But then I reframed. This is training in listening. This is practice in patience. This is my chance to master myself. Suddenly, meetings weren't torture. They were workouts for my soul. And the funny thing is, once I stopped resenting them, I actually started leading them better. The Stoics would tell us, your work isn't just about your career, it's about your character. Every spreadsheet, every customer complaint, every late night, these aren't meaningless chores. They're weights you lift to build virtue. And here's the reflection I'll leave you with. You may not love your job. Maybe it's not your dream role. But if you see it as training, it becomes meaningful. Because every moment is a chance to practice the only thing that truly matters. Becoming a wiser, stronger, more virtuous human being. So tomorrow, when you clock in, don't see it as drudgery. See it as practice. Your workplace is your dojo. Your tasks are your weights. And with each challenge, you're not just earning a paycheck, you're sculpting your soul. That's the Stoic way. Lesson 11. Amor fati. Loving your fate and letting go of outcomes. If there's one phrase that captures the heart of Stoicism, it's amor fati, Latin for love of fate. Not just accepting fate, not just tolerating it, but loving it. To the Stoics, life isn't something to fight against, it's something to embrace fully, even when it brings hardship, loss, or disappointment. Seneca wrote, "Fate leads the willing and drags along the reluctant." Epictetus said, "Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything thrown into it." In other words, the Stoic sage doesn't just endure what happens. He transforms it into fuel. Now, let's be honest, this idea can sound radical. How can you love losing your job, or being betrayed, or facing illness? The Stoics didn't mean you should be happy about pain itself. They meant you should see life as a whole, as a work of art, and trust that even the dark strokes belong to the painting. Let me give you a story. A friend of mine, Rachel, lost her husband unexpectedly in a car accident. She was devastated. At first, she raged against fate. Why him? Why me? But over time, through therapy and reflection, she found a Stoic perspective. She told me, "I can't change what happened, but I can choose to love the life we had, love the lessons his death taught me about how precious time is, and love the strength I've discovered in myself." That's amor fati, not denial, not fake cheerfulness, but a deep embrace of reality, even when it's brutal. In America, we're taught to be control freaks. We want to manage everything: our careers, our relationships, our health, even our image online. But the truth is, control is limited. Markets crash, people leave, bodies age. The Stoics say, stop fighting reality. Instead, flow with it. Love it, even the parts you didn't choose. Here's another example. During the COVID-19 pandemic, millions of people had their lives turned upside down. Jobs lost, plans canceled, dreams deferred. Some people spiraled into bitterness, waiting for normal to return. Others, though, practiced amor fati. They said, "This is reality. How can I use it?" They spent more time with family. They started businesses. They learned new skills. They didn't love the pandemic, but they loved the chance it gave them to grow. That's the Stoic flame, turning obstacles into fuel. Amor fati is also about freedom from outcomes. The Stoics remind us you can control effort, but not results. So do your work diligently, love the process, and let the outcome fall where it may. That doesn't mean apathy, it means resilience. Whether you succeed or fail, you remain steady because your joy comes from the act of living, not the scoreboard. I'll share something personal. Years ago, I started a business that eventually failed. At first, I was ashamed. I thought, all that work, all those years, for nothing. But later, I realized it wasn't for nothing. It taught me resilience. It introduced me to people I never would have met. It sharpened my skills in ways I still use today. Failure wasn't wasted. It was part of my fate, and learning to love it freed me from bitterness. So how do we practice amor fati in daily life? Rehearse acceptance. Each morning, remind yourself, things will not go as planned. People will disappoint you. Events will surprise you. Say to yourself, I will meet whatever comes with love. Reframe setbacks. When something goes wrong, ask, how can this serve me? What lesson, what strength, what growth can come from this? That reframe is the fire that transforms pain into power. Detach from results. Focus on your actions, your effort, your integrity. Whether it leads to praise or blame, success or failure is secondary. The joy is in the doing. Practice gratitude. Even in hardship, find something to be grateful for. Seneca wrote, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." Gratitude turns fate into gift. Let's look at history. Abraham Lincoln
lost elections, faced depression, and carried immense burdens. Yet he once said, "I am not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I am not bound to succeed, but I am bound to live by the light that I have." That's amor fati in American form. Embracing reality, walking with integrity, no matter the outcome.
And here's the reflection I'll leave you with. Life will give you things you didn't ask for. Loss, failure, hardship. But it will also give you love, beauty, and moments of joy. The Stoics remind us, don't pick and choose, love it all. Because this is the only life you get. And wishing it were different won't make it so. So instead of fighting fate, embrace it. Instead of resenting what happens, use it. Instead of clinging to outcomes, love the process. Amor fati.
That's not resignation, that's freedom.